That's 7 News for this Saturday. A special broadcast is next. A final salute to Prince Philip with Rick and Sue.
Her Majesty's most trusted advisor, her rock, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh.
He passed away aged 99 after a month-long stay in hospital. A man of loyalty, dedicated to duty, the Crown, the Commonwealth.
Tonight, a final salute to the Queen's husband. We're live to his funeral inside the walls of Windsor Castle.
And we'll bring you every detail about how this historic ceremony will unfold, what the Queen and her family will do before, during and after the service. Plus expert commentary and unique insight from our correspondents and the BBC's Angela Rippon.
The Patriarch, the Prince, 1921 to 2021. Good evening and welcome to this special broadcast, a final salute to Prince Philip.
We're about to see the royal family pay tribute to the Duke of Edinburgh's 7 decades of public service, the man who delivered Her Majesty unwavering loyalty, laid to rest.
In 3 hours behind the walls of Windsor Castle, a procession led by a Land Rover specially designed by Prince Philip will carry his coffin to St George's Chapel.
COVID restrictions mean only 30 people can attend. Those strict rules have left so many families heartbroken and unable to farewell loved ones, but also delivered Prince Philip the relatively small event he'd wished for.
Our Europe Bureau Chief Hugh Whitfield is live at Windsor. And Hugh, the Queen today farewells her partner in life and in duty.
Sue, we've spoken a lot this week about Prince Philip's detest for fuss, and this will be one of the least fussy royal funerals in decades. But importantly, there are key ways that Prince Philip's more than 7 decades of service to this nation and the Commonwealth are being acknowledged. It certainly won't be the send-off the Windsors had planned, the smallest royal funeral in modern times, to bid farewell to Philip, the royal patriarch and prince.
Prince Philip would have been entitled to whatever he wanted. And what originally was going to happen was that he was going to start at St James's Palace, and there was going to be a pretty tight ceremonial procession, and it would have been quite a big funeral. There would have been a lot of people there.
Despite its low-key nature, there will be no shortage of personal touches today. Philip's coffin will be draped in his personal standard, the blue and white of the Greek national flag, along with the 3 lions of the Danish coat of arms, references to the Duke's family heritage. The black and white stripes of his mother's Mountbatten family, plus the castle to represent his Duke of Edinburgh title. His naval cap and sword will be placed on the coffin, which will travel on the back of a custom Land Rover designed by the Duke himself.
It's been looked after all these years by Jaguar. You can be certain it will be in absolutely splendid working order. And it's just so like him to do that. He was always designing things. He had his own Land Rover in Scotland, which had a kind of barbecue unit, everything slotted in, that he could take out.
Philip's coffin will leave Windsor Castle at 2:40 local time, 9:40 p.m. on the Australian west coast. Shortly after, the slow procession will leave the castle quadrangle, an 8-minute route lined by armed forces personnel. The procession will arrive at the west steps of St George's Chapel before a minute's silence is held across the nation. The stunning chapel was the venue for Princess Eugenie's marriage and for the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's wedding. The Duchess won't be among the mourners today, choosing to stay in California. The 30-person guest list is made up of the Queen, who will sit by herself in line with COVID rules. Her 4 children and their spouses will also attend. So too all 8 grandchildren, their husbands and wives, the Queen's cousins and Prince Philip's German relatives, descendants of his sisters. His sisters were kept away from the royal wedding back in 1947. Married to Germans, their attendance deemed insensitive in post-war Britain. At his wedding, the Duke had little sway over ceremonial proceedings, but he has painstakingly planned his own farewell, from the hymns the choir will sing to the Bible readings and even the medals on display. Philip has chosen a ceremonial royal funeral instead of a state funeral.
Goodbye, England's rose.
It's the same sort of service held for both the Queen Mother and Princess Diana in 1997. On that day, a young William and Harry walked side by side behind their mother's coffin.
Prince Philip said to them the night before, "I think when you're older that you'd very much regret it if you don't walk behind your mother's coffin, and I will walk with you."
Today the brothers will reunite, carefully choreographed to walk separately in the procession for their grandfather. It is an ancient tradition in the royal household, here at Queen Victoria's funeral in Windsor in 1901, and for King George VI, Elizabeth's father. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson bowed out today to allow an extra family member to attend, a far cry from the Queen Mother's funeral, attended by a host of foreign dignitaries.
The Prime Minister of Australia, John Howard.
Back in 1953, Prince Philip pioneered the concept of broadcasting his wife's coronation around the world, and today that legacy remains. Millions of viewers will watch the Duke's funeral service, a private farewell, on a very public stage. One of the most experienced broadcasters in this country is alongside me for our coverage this evening. Angela Rippon, good evening to you. Just in the last hour, Prince Philip's coffin has been moved from the private chapel here at Windsor Castle to the inner hall, where it will await the formal proceedings. This is going to be a very different day, isn't it?
This is going to be a funeral that has played right into Philip's hands. This is the funeral which, given total freedom, he would have planned for himself. But because of COVID, I think I said earlier it was 30 people only are allowed, not only at his funeral, but every funeral that's happened during the last year for anyone who has lost a relative or a loved one. He is originally planned his funeral. He would have had 800 guests. It would have been a massive event, the thing that the British do extremely well. But now this is going to be a private family funeral. It'll be, yes, the eyes of the world will be on them through television, but it's going to be intimate. Just that tiny little group of family in St George's Chapel. He would be delighted that this is what it is.
Just the way he would have liked it. Now, we've heard a lot about Prince Philip's character over the last week of his 99 years. You met him a number of times, didn't you?
Yes, I did. In fact, the last time I met him, I had dinner with him here in that building over there, at a private dinner in the private part of Windsor Castle. But the first time I met him, I was one of the founders of TVAM, the commercial breakfast station here in Britain. And because Prince Philip was opening the new Billingsgate Market when it was moved out of the City of London and out onto the Isle of Dogs, I was doing the programme live from Billingsgate that morning, and I was on air live doing much what we're doing now, and suddenly there was a kerfuffle behind me, and I looked and there was Prince Philip and his team walking past me, and we had sort of rows of frozen fish in between us, and he shouted out to me, "Angela Rippon, what are you doing up this time in the morning?" And I said, "Well, I'm here, sir, like you, I'm here to work." And he went, "Well, we better both get on with it then." And off he went.
He knew his job.
He knew what he wanted to do, yes.
Now, there is something else different about this funeral. At the Queen Mother's funeral, we saw members of the royal family wearing their military uniforms. Now, that is not happening today. There's been a lot said about Harry, but there are other reasons too, aren't there?
There are. I mean, everyone has said, what is Harry going to do? Well, of course, Harry, because he has given up royal duties, he's not a working member of the firm anymore. He had to give up all of his military associations. He is not allowed to wear military uniform anymore. But there was a question over Prince Andrew, who wanted to wear the uniform of the Admiral of the Royal Navy. And my father was a Royal Marine. I have a lot of friends who are Royal Marines, who are in the Navy. And they were all saying privately, no, because with the Epstein business hanging as a shadow over Andrew's head at the moment, they were all saying, no, we don't want him representing the Royal British Navy wearing that outfit. And so the Queen very sensibly, I think, stepped in and took what was the pragmatic, but I think proper decision, which said, Nobody is going to wear any kind of uniform. You can wear your medals, but you don't wear a uniform, and that way we have no argument and no embarrassment.
The changes that the Queen has been forced to make because of the COVID regulations in place in this country mean that, I guess, Prince Philip's plan will not be carried out to the nth degree, but it will be in the spirit of what he wanted. And the military will still be represented, won't it? Because there are so many attachments and units that will be there in the quadrangle in Windsor Castle.
Oh, very much so. I mean, he won't have 800 guests as he would have done if he was in Westminster Abbey, but there are 730 members of the military representing the Army, the Navy, the Royal Marines and the Air Force, who will provide the guard of honour from the private chapel all the way down through that first part of Windsor Castle, past the Tower and down towards St George's Chapel. You will have the King's Troop with their guns. That journey is going to take 8 minutes, and every minute will be marked with a round of gunfire as they go down. So yes, there will be a very strong military presence, but there will be a lot of people, perhaps from the charities that he represented, 800 or more of them, many other people who would love to have been at his funeral, who will either be gathered on the long walk outside Windsor Castle at the moment or staying at home watching on television. This is a private family funeral. It will be a very intimate ceremony, but it will still be the ceremony that he wanted during his funeral. It will be the music and the readings, no one giving a eulogy. The rest of it will be very military and what he planned.
Angela, thank you very much. A lot to look for soon.
Hugh, thank you very much.
As the UK mourns, it's also coming out of COVID lockdown. Let's go live to Sarah Greenhalgh in London. Sarah, this is the first Saturday of the year that people are allowed back into pubs and restaurants, so it'll be a very unusual day there.
Yeah, it will, Rick. Good evening. That's a good way to explain it. There's very mixed feelings here today. This is the first weekend of relative freedom here in England since December. It is the first Saturday, as you say, that people can head out to the shops, they can go to restaurants, they can go to pubs, outdoors again for the first time. It is glorious weather here today, so we are expecting Londoners to do just that. We've spoken to some of them who say they are going to beer gardens. That is where they will be watching the funeral on big screens. They will be raising a glass and toasting the Duke and his incredible 7+ decades of service. We've heard so many tributes this past week from members of the Duke's family, including from Prince Harry, and this is quite fitting. He said as much as his grandpa would have loved hearing all these lovely things about him if he was here, he probably would have been standing there with a beer telling everyone to get on with it. And in some way, that is what the British people are doing today. They're trying to get on with their lives after months of lockdown, but they will also be observing that nationwide minute silence at 3 p.m. before the Duke's funeral starts. There will be no crowds, or the public elements of this funeral have been cancelled due to COVID-19, so people are being asked to watch it on TV at home. There's also been a lot of online tributes, and in the past few hours there has been a fresh one on the royal family's Twitter account. This beautiful montage of photos of Prince Philip, accompanied by a poem written by the UK's Poet Laureate Simon Armitage to, quote, commemorate the extraordinary life of the Duke of Edinburgh, made unique by its sheer breadth of experience and the wartime generation he was part of. Here is some of that poem.
On such an occasion, to presume to eulogise one man is to pipe up for a whole generation. That crew whose survival was always the stuff of minor miracle, who came ashore in orange crate coracles, fought ingenious wars, finagled triumphs at sea with flaming decoy boats and sidestep torpedoes.
Despite the palace officially requesting that people didn't gather outside royal residences, we have seen a steady stream of people arriving at Buckingham Palace and other residences since the Duke passed away last Friday to lay flowers and to pay their respects. Today here we've seen a really notable increase in the police presence. A lot of officers going up to people, telling them to disperse, not to congregate and to go home and watch the funeral that way. I was chatting with one man yesterday, guys, who said that he will be sitting down today with his family to watch the service because it is a part of history and it's something that he wants to be able to share with his grandkids in years to come.
Thanks, Sarah. You're watching a special edition of 7 News, a final salute to Prince Philip.
We'll have every development on his funeral from Windsor and the full ceremony live.
But next, the Duke's passion for Perth. 11 official visits to WA. The inside word from our Governor, Kim Beazley. He's live in our studio.
Plus, he's known to be prone to a public gaffe. Next, an inside story on how Prince Philip really viewed diplomacy. That's next in this special edition of 7 News.
Windsor Castle, a funeral procession will soon begin, with the Duke of Edinburgh's casket carried by a custom-built Land Rover Defender 130. The Queen will follow with a lady-in-waiting. Prince Harry and Prince William will walk in the procession, but they won't be side by side. In a sign, the royal rift will even play out at the funeral.
The Queen won't allow family dramas to overshadow the farewell for her husband. Today she shared a private image taken by the Countess of Wessex in 2003. The couple had been walking the Scottish Highlands. This image from a mountain in the Coils of Newark. A treasured memory is one that will be many that will be remembered today.
Perth helped make some incredible memories too. Our city was set to be one of the Duke's favourite places to visit.
Prince Philip came here 11 times and always gave up his own time to meet West Australians.
A royal wave goodbye. The Duke of Edinburgh's final farewell to WA. Now it's our turn to pay our respects to the Prince, who loved Perth.
Probably an end of an era that we'll never see again. I just think it's really sad he didn't make it to 100.
It's sad, yeah. Just a great man and did great service for his country. Yeah, very sad, but as I say, not unexpected. 99's a great life, isn't it?
Shared grief for the man who was closest to the crown. He'll never receive his 100th birthday letter from his Queen, but now it's West Australians who are writing for him.
I put in a lift for the Queen. The Duke, he would take those steps out, that he would run up the stairs.
Government House is where he stayed in 2011. A barbecue fit for a king or a prince.
We can't tempt you with a little taste.
They didn't sample the food, but Prince Philip took up the tongs.
And one of his entourage said he never eats, very rarely flips, but he flipped for Perth, Western Australia.
The mega gathering was the Duke's idea.
I'm not a bit surprised. He trained himself to talk to everybody. I can understand if you're talking to an Australian, you'd think a great Aussie barbecue was important.
First painting the town red, white and blue in 1954.
And hospitable Perth, fresh, alert, scrubbed by the sun. City of Australia's tomorrow.
A solo tour in 1962 for the Commonwealth Games, watching every sport, spontaneous appearances, 59 engagements in just 12 days.
He did love the place. The sun, the sea and the sand.
Back a year later.
And there is the car bearing Her Majesty the Queen and the Prince Philip. They are met by the Premier, Mr. Brand and Mrs. Brand.
Seen here with the Queen in 1963 at UWA during a fleeting two-day trip.
Now His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh, moves across to where the Assistant to the Curator, Mr. John Davey, is waiting.
The Prince couldn't stay away, returning in the 70s and then in 88, where the tour included Kalgoorlie.
And he says, so you're responsible for the biggest bloody traffic jam in history. And I looked him in the eye and I said, well, you see, if you're going to do something, you do it well. And he looked at me and then had a bit of a giggle, shook my hands and said, well done.
Dave would have taken a bullet for the polarising Prince, the high-ranking policeman, part of Philip's security detail on 3 of his WA tours.
He was interesting. Everyone was on their toes. We always got a thumbs up or a thumbs down in the morning before we went with him. The thumbs up was he was in a good mood. The thumbs down was just be careful, and because he could get a bit testy.
As Prince Philip arrived smiling to be greeted by the Premier and the Prime Minister.
That was in 1990, consort of the Crown with a passion for conservation.
Now, it's quite obvious that a great deal has to be done if a major catastrophe is to be avoided.
It was Broome and Geraldton's turn to host the Duke in 92, and then down south to Busselton when we hit the 2000s. King of the Kids. Prince Philip visited WA 11 times, either alone or with the Queen. He was one of our most frequent royal visitors, coming here more times than the monarch herself.
He did. All the royal family loved WA, mainly because of the beauty of our countryside, the beauty of our outback.
A prince that was ahead of his time, setting a new world record as he left Perth for what would be his final time.
The royal flight will be an 18-hour non-stop haul direct from Perth to London.
The Queen carries the crown, but ultimately Prince Philip helped carry her all around the world, including right here in WA.
How much they were a shoulder for each other. And for that, her now to be deprived of that is a body blow.
Jordan Katz, 7 News.
And joining us in the studio tonight is the Queen's representative in Western Australia, the Governor, Kim Beazley. Governor, thanks for coming in tonight. The Queen and Prince Philip have visited Australia a number of times, and in your life as a politician, you've seen them a few times. What are they like in real life?
Well, they're terrific in real life. I mean, I think your news speech just then was fantastic. It gave you a very clear impression of what they're like. Because the first time I didn't meet them, but I was a malevolent presence. I had polio. And they were worried that I had transported the portfolio to my mother, which I had. The polio to my mother, which in fact I had. And so they stayed on the Britannia. They did not come ashore in Perth for living purposes. And nobody was allowed to get anywhere near touching them, shaking hands or doing anything of the sort. However, I was better behaved at subsequent occasions. And I think my most enjoyable memories, and I have several enjoyable memories, but the most enjoyable ones is when I was Defence Minister.
Quite soon.
And Bob Hawke always used to assign me to look after him whenever he was in town, because he was fascinated by military education and he thought the British did it very badly and we did it very well. So they wanted conversations on that.
So it wasn't just formalities that you had with him, you actually enjoyed the conversations?
I did, and my wife once sat next to him too, this was later than then, at a dinner at Government House in Canberra, and when I was opposition leader, and they sat and talked for about an hour and a half about children, how you raised them and what was the things that he found most interesting with it. She had a fabulous conversation with him. He was very, in conversations, he was a combination of brusque and down to earth. And he wanted you to be providing him with information. And if you were wittering, you're in trouble.
And when he came to Western Australia on those visits, what were his thoughts quickly on Perth?
I loved it. Well, Perth is what every English person thinks is Australia. And none of Australia is but Perth. It's why 7% of us Australians were born in the United Kingdom, but 14% of us in Perth. And so the sun, the light, the environment on the beaches, it was all his imagination. So he loved Perth.
Thank you, Governor. We'll chat again soon. Prince Philip certainly shook a few hands in his life.
But some encounters weren't always to plan, from yelling at photographers to saying what were deemed culturally insensitive or plain racist comments. He was often in trouble in the papers. But insiders say he never meant any harm.
The Duke of Edinburgh is quite a robust character. He often put his foot in his mouth. He said things in public that maybe he shouldn't have done, but he was from his age.
Prince Philip will tonight be remembered as outspoken but hard-working and incredibly loyal to his job, the Crown and the Commonwealth. Let's take you back live to your Bureau Chief Hugh Whitfield and Angela Rippon at Windsor Castle on how Philip will be remembered today.
Rick, he won't just be remembered as a man of great influence around the world, the Queen's consort, but he was also very much a family man, wasn't he, Angela, as well? And we've got a photo that was released by Buckingham Palace during the week. It was taken in 2018 by the Duchess of Cambridge, and it shows the Queen and Prince Philip at Balmoral Castle, surrounded by their then 7 great-grandchildren, including Prince George, Princess Charlotte, Prince Louis sitting on the Queen's knee, along with the Tyndall girls and the Phillips girls as well. And more than anything, Angela, it shows that he was very much not just Prince Philip, but he was great-grandpa, wasn't he?
He was head of the family. He really was, and he loved having the youngsters around him. He'd had a pretty sort of chaotic childhood himself, living on his own most of the time, but he loved having young people around him, and he adored spending time with his own children, then with his grandchildren, and then to have all these wonderful great-grandchildren around was absolutely terrific. But of course that photograph, lovely as it is, there are 3 missing. And that is Archie, who of course is as the son of Harry and Meghan. Now, he did see Archie, and Archie in fact is the one that will carry his family name. He is Archie Mountbatten Windsor. The other 2, of course, who are Lucas and August, they're the children that have been born subsequently to Zara and Eugenie. And he's never seen them because they've been born since the beginning of the year when we've all been in lockdown, and he was then in hospital all of those weeks. He never saw them. But the lovely thing is that both of those little boys are going to carry his name, because it's going to be August Philip and it's going to be Lucas Philip. And that would be terrific.
A family man. And look,
Yes.
There's plenty of Australians who can relate to burying a grandfather or a father who served in the Second World War. And it's hard to believe that he was still around up until last week as a World War II veteran. He was even in the Bay of Tokyo when the Japanese surrendered.
Yes, he was. He was on board his ship HMS Whelp because, like a lot of the British Navy, the Pacific Fleet, they were assigned to the Fifth Navy, the Fifth Fleet of the Americans, who were still fighting in Japan, and a lot of British naval forces went to join them. My father was there on HMS Newfoundland, and they were there, of course, when the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They saw action in that particular arena, but of course, after those bombs were dropped, the Japanese surrendered, and the Japanese surrender took place on one of the American aircraft carriers in the Bay of Tokyo, and all the ships that had been involved in that arena of war were witness to this happening. You know, you could get the binoculars out, you could actually see what was happening. And Philip was one of them. He was there on HMS Whelp, and many years later he was on a tour with Her Majesty as consort, and they went to Japan. And apparently at one of the state dinners, the then Prime Minister of Japan said, well, of course, Prince Philip, this will be your first trip to Japan. And several years later, he was recounting this story at a dinner, and he said to his audience, when the Prime Minister said that, he said, I stopped and I had to think for a minute, and I finally said, yes, Prime Minister, it is my first visit. Of course, everybody laughed, at which point Philip said, as you've just been hearing, you know, he was known for his gaffes, and he said, look, people may say I put my foot in my mouth too often, but when I have to be diplomatic, I can be. And he played that role so perfectly alongside the Queen for more than 7 decades. That was his job. Absolutely. Angela, thank you so much. Rick and Sue.
Thanks, Hugh. You're watching a special edition of 7 News.
We're live to Windsor next as we farewell Prince Philip.
Plus, Prince Philip's biographer with the inside word on how the Queen will be grieving the man she described as her rock. You're watching 7 News live across Western Australia.
The man who was the Queen's private secretary lives here in Perth. People from across the Commonwealth fulfil roles in the palace. Sir William Heseltine worked for the royal family for 30 years. He told 7 News today the couple were so close, both in public and behind closed doors.
I think it was a wonderfully happy marriage and an extraordinarily long one. And she must be very bereft.
Prince Philip was a keen sportsman playing polo until he was 50, but when he had to give it away, it left a void which the Duke filled with his very own sport.
Carriage driving started as a passion project for Philip, but now it's an international competition.
I started driving because I'd been playing polo, and I decided that I would give up polo when I was 50. I happened to be 50. And I was looking around to see what next, you know. And I suddenly thought, well, we've got horses and carriages and grooms. I said, well, why don't I have a go? So I borrowed 4 horses from the stables in London, took them to Norfolk and practiced, and you know, thought, well, why not?
The Duke of Edinburgh had invented a new sport. Carriage driving. It seemed like more of a young man's game. Here, Prince Philip was thrown from the carriage, but the Duke was always in control.
Wrote the rules, got it up and running, and made it the sport that it is today.
And influenced a young Australian.
I met him in the 1988 Bicentennial Carriage Driving Championships in Canberra. I was 15 at the time, and he was one of the reasons sort of inspired me to come to Europe and carry on with my competition carriage driving and coaching.
Boyd Exel is now a 5-time world champion.
It is amazing how they control these horses.
Prince Philip became a friend.
I remember one time we were at Alnwick Castle, and I was invited to a sort of private barbecue with 4 or 6 people, and Prince Philip was in charge of the roast. And he knew exactly how long he wanted to barbecue it for, sit down. And then just for a little bit of fun, he sort of made one phone call and suddenly the lights lit up on the castle. He had another side to him that was very serious. He was very competitive. His bodyguards, actually, one of their jobs was to collect all the paperwork. And while he was being chauffeured back to the castle, he would study the scores and results.
Because he had arthritis at a relatively early age, he took up what he considered to be a sort of geriatric sport. Well, I can tell you, it's not. You have to have, the mental acuity of that you wouldn't believe, and you have to be really fit.
But for Philip, there was something else about the sport, a chance to escape palace life.
Oh, you idiot!
The Duke of Edinburgh could go to an event in this country without fear or favour. Nobody was taking photographs, nobody was tweeting, nobody was putting on Instagram. It was just a family of friends who enjoyed the sport that they knew and loved. Such a cross-section of the community, you wouldn't believe. And all, I can tell you this, all very genuine people. And that's what the Duke of Edinburgh liked, genuine people.
A new sporting career for Prince Philip that would begin at 50 years of age and would last another half a century. Philip was still driving carriages well into his final year.
Quite recently he was driving still at the age of 99, and this was his downtime. And he really enjoyed it, and so he never had airs and graces.
Let's go live to Royal Editor and Prince Philip biographer Rob Jobson. Rob, what's so significant about the Queen and Prince Philip's marriage?
I think the length of the marriage that lasts 73 years, it's pretty impressive. I've had 4 marriages and they haven't lasted very long, so an incredible amount of time. So all I would say, that I've got a couple of stories for you today. They've got Lady Susan Hussey and Mo Mossy Morrison is probably going to be in the car with the Queen. She spent today with Angela Kelly, her dresser, and Ian Carmichael, her hairdresser, making herself look $1 million for the day to send off her husband, who she just wanted to look really good and relaxed, because she knew the cameras would be trained on her, and she wants to be looking her very, very best for him.
People have watched the TV show The Crown, which depicted a sometimes distant relationship between the two. Was that the case in real life?
Well, in the duration of a 73-year marriage, there's going to be ups and downs. He said once, a meeting, when someone asked him what the secret of a happy marriage was, he said, spend plenty of time apart and have different interests. But I think he was joking a little bit.
So how do you think the Queen is feeling on this amazing day today?
The huge void has been lost. It's a huge void in her life. The man was, her rock. He was her liege man in life and limb, as he swore at the coronation. He was there to support her. He was the man, her champion. He was the man who made her laugh. Sometimes they had their differences and there'd be rows, like in any relationship. One famously was happened in Australia when they were on that tour, and an Australian film crew filmed them having a bit of a fight. But in those days, they handed the tape back. But and I think there were shoes flying.
Rob, what about William and Harry? Do you think the Queen would have approved
Love match
of them?
Between people.
Yes. William and Harry, do you think the Queen would have approved of what's been going on and the fact that they have to be separated at the funeral in the walk?
Well, boys will be boys. One would have thought, wouldn't one, that they could agree to disagree on this one and walk behind shoulder to shoulder, but they clearly can't, and in between them will be Peter Phillips. Now, Peter Phillips is Princess Anne's son, and he was a former Scottish schools rugby player, so if there's any trouble, I'm sure that he'll be able to deal with it. And there's also Mike Tyndall in the crowd, Zara's husband there, who's an England rugby player, so if there's any problems, I think they'll be able to resolve it.
Let's hope not, though. Thank you very much, Rob.
The Queen is now a widow, a ruler without her right-hand man.
Next, how our head of state will operate when her official period of mourning ends, and which royals will step up to help even more.
You're watching our special coverage of the funeral of Prince Philip. In terms of how this will unfold tonight, Philip's coffin will leave Windsor Castle at 9:40 p.m. Perth time this evening. Shortly after, the procession will leave the castle quadrangle. The 8-minute route will be lined by armed forces personnel. More details soon. Prince Philip will be farewelled in Windsor in the coming hours. 30 people, including the Queen, will be at the ceremony tonight.
You're watching our special coverage of the funeral of Prince Philip. In terms of how this will unfold tonight, Philip's coffin will leave Windsor Castle at 9:40 p.m. Perth time. Shortly after, the procession will leave the castle quadrangle. The 8-minute route will be lined by armed forces personnel. The procession then arrives at the west steps of St George's Chapel before 1 minute silence is held across the nation. The service then follows in front of only 30 mourners. All the details of the service have been meticulously planned by Prince Philip, from the hymns the choir will sing to Bible readings, even the medals on display. This is a very private farewell, but only on a very public stage to be witnessed by a television audience of millions.
This is a special edition of 7 News on the day the royal family farewells Prince Philip. In the past week, some of the British newspapers' most celebrated cartoonists put pen to paper to pay tribute to the Queen's consort.
The Yorkshire Post printed this poignant picture of a corgi shedding a tear next to the Queen and Philip's naval cap. The Evening Standard shows a solitary Queen with her husband's shadow behind her.
And the Times of London depicts Prince Philip in his wife's shadow, along with the quote, "Grief is the price we pay for love," a line from a speech the Queen gave in the wake of the September 11 attacks.
And we're joined again by the Governor of Western Australia, Kim Beazley, and there'll only be 30 mourners at the funeral today because of COVID restrictions, Kim, Governor, and typically we would be sending a representative, wouldn't we?
Well, Kim will do, by the way, but that's okay. Yes, we would, and we sort of have. We have the Defence Attaché, because the Duke identified a group of Defence Attachés that he wanted to be lining the area before his coffin entered into the chapel, but not in the chapel itself. So I think, and I could stand corrected, it's Admiral Holthouse, who is the chap who is the fellow who's there as the DA at the London High Commission. So, but yes, I actually think this is very sad. I think that there's a lot of people who'd want to give him a farewell. Now, I know what he wants. He wanted. But there was a lot of people who loved him and a lot of people grateful to him. And it's just sad, it just saddens me a bit that they don't have the chance.
And as Governor, you're involved in the Duke of Edinburgh Award set up by Prince Philip in 1956. Now, that's been a great scheme for Western Australians, hasn't it?
Certainly has. It's a heck of a legacy. As we speak, and probably out there watching us, there are over 40,000 kids in WA doing the courses that are associated with that. They did brilliantly during COVID. They worked out ways, because they're mostly outdoor courses, and they worked out ways to do them in the context of COVID. They're very great initiatives, which is what they're supposed to get from all of this. Partly what they're supposed to get is great initiative, and they do. And the Duke, they call them the Duke of Ed Awards, and or Ed Awards, and they're going to continue. I think it's in 100 countries. We've had over 775,000 do it in Australia. This is a substantial population.
Governor, you also talked about when you were Defence Minister and his particular interest in defence.
Yeah, he was. He's enormously interested. He was interested in defence education. And he thought the British did it extremely badly and we did it extremely well, so we'd have those conversations. But my funniest defence-type memory is up in Kings Park. And we'd laid a couple of wreaths, and I don't think we'd got the gun salute properly into the record, so people weren't aware of that there was going to be a gun salute. So we're walking away, and then blam! And everybody jumps a foot except him. He's used to naval gunfire. And somebody says, "What was that?" And he says, "Well, I don't know, but it didn't get me."
Kim Beazley, Governor of Western Australia, thanks for your time.
Good to be with you.
Thank you. We'll go back now to Hugh Whitfeld and Angela Rippon.
Sue, thank you. Angela, today we are going to see a woman in her 90s who has lost her husband of 73 years. For the Queen, this is enormously difficult, surely.
It is, and we say they were married for 73 years, but of course she's known him much longer than that. She saw him first at Dartmouth Royal Naval College when she was 13. She met him again, I think, when she was 15. She fell in love with him. You know, he's Danish. That's his heritage. He had the blonde hair, he had the looks of a Scandinavian handsome young man. She fell in love with him. It was not an arranged marriage. There were people in the royal family against their marriage. She had her eyes firmly set. Philip was the man she wanted. So, yes, they've been married for 73 years, but you could say that now she's 95, she's loved him for 80 years or more. And so she's loved that man longer than some people have actually lived. And this is going to be a huge wrench when, after the 9/11 bombing in America, Her Majesty sent a letter to the President of the United States, and at the end she put a personal message and said, "Love comes with grief, and you can't have one without the other." And that's what she's going to be going through at the moment. And the thing is, I suppose she's had time to prepare for being on her own a little, because the Duke, he retired, 5 years ago in 2017. He moved to Wood Cottage on the Sandringham estate. He didn't have very much to do with the family. He was there, he read, he painted, he joined them for Christmas, and he spoke to the Queen every day on the telephone, but they weren't together. The pandemic brought them together here to the castle, where with a reduced household they were in what was called HMS Bubble. So they saw each other every day, except for since just before Christmas, when he'd been in and out of hospital. She's had him still by her side and spent a lot of time with him, but he will not be there with her for royal duties, and in the 5 years she's got used to doing things on her own or with other members of the family. And the thing is, the family will know her grief will be immense, as anybody who's lost a loved one will appreciate. But clearly the family, who all adore her, will just put their arms round her now and give her a big hug and make sure she's not alone and know that she's loved.
The Queen has lost a man who has been there for her
Yes.
for 80 years, as you say. Probably the only person who can speak freely to her and speak truth to her. So who becomes that close confidant now?
Well, there's what's referred to as the Gang of Four, and they're 4 women. And one of them is Princess Alexandra, her cousin, whom, of course, she's known all her life and whom she adores. She has her daughter, Princess Anne, who is a hard-working member of the royal family. She also has her dresser, Angela, who is very, very close to her. But she also has Sophie Wessex. Now, Sophie married Edward, her youngest son, and they've just hit it off. They share a lot of things in common. She adores Sophie, and Sophie and Edward are stepping up like everybody else in the family. But I suspect we will see even more of Sophie than we have in the past, because Sophie makes her laugh. Sophie is there with, she's a great companion, and without losing any deference to the Princess Royal, to Princess Anne, many people say Sophie is the other daughter she never had. She had 3 sons, 1 daughter. Sophie's that other daughter.
And of course, Sophie and Edward live not far from Windsor Castle, just down the road.
Yeah.
Prince Andrew's down the road
Yes.
as well. It's often been said that Prince Andrew is the Queen's favourite son. Obviously, he's got some issues in his personal life that have overshadowed understatement.
You can say that.
A lot of that, yes, it's an understatement possibly. But he is very, very close to his mother, isn't he?
Yes, he is very close, and he has been her favourite forever. And so, but again, lives just down the road, and we're not in quite the same situation with the pandemic here. At least you can now have 6 people meeting out of doors, so they will come and see her. They will spend as much time with her as they possibly can. They will make sure that she's not alone. She will want to celebrate her grief, if you like, in private. Yes, but the family, they're incredibly supportive, and they will make sure that when she needs that shoulder to cry on, because she won't cry in public, that she can do that with them, and that's the closeness of this family.
And I don't think there's been any doubt at all about the willingness of Her Majesty to carry on with her duty.
Oh, none at all. Absolutely none at all, no. I mean, she became Queen when she was in her 20s, much earlier than she expected. Her father died when he was just 56. She was looking forward to, I'm sure, many years as Princess Elizabeth, married to Prince Philip, who had a wonderful career in the Navy. They were looking forward to many years together to bring up their children. That did not happen. So since she was born to it, she knew that when once her uncle abdicated, she knew that was going to be her role. And since she was in her 20s, she has lived for crown and country. And Philip has been by her side. She will not shirk that duty now, but she will do it with the support of every other member of the firm.
Yes, the Magnificent Seven, I think, is how they're termed now, with Charles and Camilla, William, Kate, Edward, Sophie and Anne supporting the Queen in
all
those
at the
duties.
funeral today, and all, of course, in the wake afterwards, which is when they will be able to share their grief collectively. But you will see a lot of stoic faces today. I think you might see a few tears, but I doubt that you'll see any from the Queen. You might see some from other members of the family, but no, the moment when they will share their grief together will be when once they are away from the cameras and are back in the private apartments here at the castle.
Yeah, I have little doubt that they'll be craving that time away from the cameras to share their own stories of their father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and of course for Her Majesty, her husband of 73 years, Rick and Sue.
Hugh and Angela, thank you very much. You're watching a special edition of 7 News.
This is a final salute to Prince Philip ahead of his funeral in 2 hours.
He'll be farewelled in a small funeral at St George's Chapel inside Windsor Castle. More live soon. Despite his tough exterior and no-nonsense attitude in public, Prince Philip was extremely proud of each of his 4 children, as different as they all were.
In 1997, the Duke gave a rare glimpse into his private life as a father, paying tribute to Charles, Anne, Andrew and Edward.
And like all families, we went through the full range of pleasures and tribulations of bringing up children. I'm naturally somewhat biased, but I think our children have done rather well under very different and difficult and demanding circumstances.
It's a job few would envy, painting the notoriously unpredictable Prince Philip, but one Australian artist was entrusted with the special task.
It was made all the more important by the knowledge it would likely be the Duke of Edinburgh's final portrait.
When Ralph Hymans was granted a 1-hour sitting with Prince Philip, palace staff warned him the Duke could be unpredictable, impatient and might even walk out. He arrived at their meeting early and unannounced.
As I was setting up the equipment with my 2 crewmates, suddenly there was a booming voice behind us, "Which one of you is the artist?" And we all turned around and he was standing there in full military garb with his medals and everything, and we all broke out in laughter. So it was a fantastic icebreaker. I think he just likes sort of surprising.
It was 2017. The Australian artist had an upcoming exhibition in Denmark, a painting of the man born Prince of Greece and Denmark, a fitting addition. Knowing it could be Philip's final portrait, Ralph chose the location carefully. The Grand Corridor at Windsor Castle, private, magnificent and full of history.
Importantly lined with busts and paintings that are very representative of ancestors of the royal family. And specifically for Philip, At the end of that corridor, in a room called the Tapestry Room, his mother and grandmother were actually born. So for him, it's like where the story began, even before he met Queen Elizabeth. So it was a beautiful spot to place it. And now, sadly, that he has passed away at Windsor Castle, it really does complete the life cycle. And that place has, extraordinary significance.
Philip too had a passion for painting, creating his own art here from the deck of the Royal Yacht Britannia. This was his most famous piece, an informal portrait of his wife, the Queen, in 1965, reading a newspaper over breakfast at Windsor Castle. During his sitting with Ralph, the Duke was inquisitive, charismatic and interested in technique.
A sparkle in his eye, a little bit of mischief, a little bit of nostalgia. He likes to make people laugh. He looks for the funny things in every situation, but that belies a kind of serious intent. I think he could see the seriousness of the portrait being potentially his last.
A masterpiece that took 10 months to complete, with Philip approving the final product.
He almost let out a bit of a sort of gasp when he first saw it, which took me by surprise because I wasn't sure how to interpret that. But I think he was quite surprised. It can be quite confronting to see an image in life-size scale of yourself like that. And he went up close and had a good close look at it and kept stepping back, quite like an artist does.
On the same day that it was unveiled, the Queen and Prince Philip decided the painting should belong in the Royal Collection. It now hangs here in St James's Palace, where in non-pandemic times the Duke of Edinburgh Awards are presented. Created in the year Philip retired from public duties, the portrait was conceived as a goodbye.
That was the original conception of the painting, that he would be looking at a last glance back at the viewer in his very sort of direct gaze.
A look that struck a chord with people around the world ahead of his final farewell.
He represents more than his position. I think he represents a piece of history. And when I painted him, I felt like I was painting history itself. He's been a part of all of our collective consciousness for all of our lives. I mean, he's been a constant, and there are very few people that we can ever call a constant in our lives. So I think people will really miss him and what he represents. I think he represents endurance and duty, some of those values that sometimes we forget are so valuable.
Prince Philip's funeral will begin soon inside Windsor Castle.
Only 30 people will be allowed at the service. That's small, but just how the Duke of Edinburgh wanted it. We'll be back soon.
The Brits have been asked to stay away from Windsor and from Buckingham Palace, the official residence of the Queen. Sarah Greenholz, the UK has suffered for so long through COVID. Is it quite eerie there in central London?
Rick, it's a really mixed feeling here in London today. People are very aware, obviously, of the significance of this moment, wanting to pay their respects to the Duke of Edinburgh and show the Queen that they are supporting her and the royal family. But there is also a sense of excitement because this is the first Saturday since last December that Londoners have had the opportunity to go out to shops, to restaurants, to pubs. It is a glorious day here, so they will be doing that. But people will be marking that 1 minute silence at 3 p.m. in various ways. London's famous black taxi drivers will be congregating in the Mall here to observe that minute's silence. And a funny little story for you. Prince Philip actually used to drive around London in his own eco-friendly black taxi. He wanted to be incognito sometimes, going from engagement to engagement. My cameraman Charlie said he actually saw him leaving these gates of Buckingham Palace one day. No personal protection officers, no security, just Philip in the driver's seat waving goodbye to the guards. So another insight into the sort of character the Duke of Edinburgh was, guys.
Thanks, Sarah. You're watching a special edition of 7 News. A final salute to Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. He'll soon be farewelled inside Windsor Castle during a small official ceremony.
Let's now join our British broadcast partner ITV ahead of the funeral and for the service.